Okie dokie. So this is the warm up for the quiz. The first question, in fact, the first two questions we're going to have to rewrite. It gives us f of x, it gives us g of x, and it wants to know f minus g. Okay, we can rewrite it. And what it's asking for is f of x minus g of x. F of x minus g of x. Okay, so I'm going to write the f of x function minus the g of x function. So x squared minus 2x plus 5 minus the g of x function. For this operation, I have to subtract all of the g of x function. And so I'm going to distribute it the negative and I'm going to rewrite it. If this was a plus, I would do nothing. I would just rewrite everything and nothing changes, which is what I'm going to do here. There's no negative out in front, so I'm just going to rewrite everything that's in the first set of parentheses or the f of x function. For the second one, again, I've got to distribute in the negative to both parts. So negative times negative becomes positive 3x, and negative times negative becomes positive 4. From here, combine like terms. I'm just going to look for any terms that are the same. I have 1x squared and no more x squared. I have 2x terms, so I can put those together. So I have 2x terms, and then I have 2 constants that I can put together. So I am just combining like terms. So I'm going to get x squared, negative 2 and positive 3. Okay, 3 minus 2 is going to be 1, so plus x. And then 5 plus 4 is 9. Yes.
On the first part, you got x squared minus 2x. How do you minus 2x?
You know what, Jackson? That's a really great question. I don't know. Jackson said, how did this plus turn into a minus? It shouldn't have. My bad. Let's fix it. So this should be plus. This should be plus. And 3 plus 2 makes 5. Do y'all feel better about that?
Yes.
Thank you, Jackson, for speaking up. This is a safe place to make mistakes. Next, we have f times g. So this can be rewritten as f of x. Oh, and it's negative 3. Oops, let's erase that. So f of negative 3 times g of negative 3. So we're going to be plugging in negative 3 to x for both functions. And whatever value we get for those, we multiply it together. So I think it might be easier for us to figure out, we're going to plug in negative 3 to the x for f of x, and we're going to plug in negative 3 to the x for g of x. Let's figure out what each one of these are, and then whatever that value is, let's multiply them. So I'm going to get negative 3 squared minus 2, and I'm going to multiply it by negative 3 plus 5. So this is just me plugging in negative 3 to where I see x for both functions. Over here, what's negative 3 times negative 3? Positive 9. So we get 9 minus 2. And then over here, I get 5 minus 3, which is 2. Okay. 9 minus 2 is 7. What's 7 times 2? 14. So this is f times g of 3. So I'm plugging negative 3. I'm plugging negative 3 into both functions. And whatever I get, I'm going to multiply those values together. Next question. Given that f of x and g of x are inverses, what is always true? This is something we wrote in our notes, and it's a question that I said you better know this on the practice. So what we have to remember is that f of g of x is equal to x, and g of f of x equals x. It's just two statements that we have to know are true. So remember that this has the little symbol. So it looks like fog and goff, but it's f of g of x and g of f of x. They are both equal to x. And you don't do anything with it. You just need to know that that's true. That's moving on. So this is using that symbol. So remember that that's g of f of x, and that's like g giving the f graph a hug. So the f graph goes inside, the g graph is giving the f graph a hug. So you can think of this little symbol as like a big hug. It's going to put the f graph in, or the f equation inside. So this is the same thing as g of f of x. You write the g function and then you put the f function inside of it. So the g function is 3x minus 2. So I'm going to write that, and I'm going to leave myself a space where the x is. So I get 3, and then I leave myself a space minus 2. And inside, I'm going to take the f of x and I'm going to put it inside. So g of f of x is inside, f of x will go inside where the x is. So inside I'm going to put x squared minus 1. Now I'm just going to evaluate. Yes.
What would we do if there's multiple exponents?
Multiple x's? We plug it in more than once. We did that on the practice worksheet. So if this was an x and then there was another x, you'd plug it in twice. However, the quiz looks remarkably like this one. So from here, I'm going to distribute in the 3 to both terms. So I get 3x squared minus 3 minus 2. And then I can combine like terms. These are both constants, so I can put them together. What's minus 3 minus 2? Yep, so I get 3x squared minus 5. The next question. So this says write an inverse. So we have to remember that an inverse is going to have all inverse operations. So my answer, it better be, instead of multiply by 2, it better be divide by 2. Instead of plus 5, it better be minus 5. They have to be inverse operations. So if all you're doing is playing a game of elimination on the answer choices, make sure that you pick the answer choices that at least make sense. So what we're going to do first is we will switch x and y. And so to switch x and y, remember that it's sometimes a good idea to rewrite it as y equals. Now I have an x and a y. I have to switch x and y and rewrite it. So I'm going to switch x and y. So I get x is equal to 2y minus 5. And now I'm going to solve for y. To solve for y, it's a two-step equation. What's my first step? Add 5. Very good. So I'm going to add 5. So I get x plus 5 is equal to 2y. Last step. What's my last step? Divide by 2. So now I'm going to rewrite it as inverse. So remember that the inverse notation looks like this. And I'm going to go ahead and rewrite it. And I get x plus 5 divided by 2. And again, I'm going to double check. Here, I'm multiplying by 2, dividing by 2. Check. Subtracting 5, adding 5. Check. They have to be opposite operations or inverse operations. Questions?
Yeah, we did a y because it was -1 on the f. Or y, how do we get y? Sorry,
Here,
yes,
isn't f of x the same thing as y?
yeah,
So our goal is to switch x and y, but I feel like sometimes students get confused because this has an x on it and that has an x. So I just want to point out that we're switching x and y. So I just rewrote it as y equals instead of f of x because they're the same thing. Any other questions? Okie dokie. The graphs. If you have been struggling with the graphs, well, then tune in. First thing that we're going to do for each one of these is rewrite them. So this is the only question on your quiz that is not multiple choice. So you actually have to write stuff out. And please don't lose 3 different questions. Please make sure that you at least try. So our first step is to rewrite. This means f of 4 minus g of 4. F of 4 minus g of 4. And the way that we get the values for these is by looking at the graphs. So the first part, f of 4. This is my f graph. I know it's my f graph because it says f right there. So on the f graph, I'm going to go over to 4 and I'm going to find where the graph lives. It lives down here at -2. So this turns into -2 minus g of 4. Okay, I'm going to come over here to the g graph. If I go all the way over to 4, the g graph is up at 1. So I'm going to plug that in. 1. What's -2 minus 1 or -2 minus 1? -3. The next one, this is g of -3 divided by f of -3. So I'm going to rewrite it like that. G of -3 divided by f of -3. And I'm going to go find each one of those on my graph. G of 3, or G of -3. On my G graph, I know this is the G graph because there's a G. On the G graph, I'm going to go to -3. When I go to -3, my graph is down here at -6.
How do we get
Here? F of 4 on my F graph at 4, it's down here at -2. And then G of 4 on my G graph, I go over to 4 and it's up at 1. So f of -3 on my F graph, I'm going to go to -3 and my graph is up at 2. What's -6 divided by 2? -3. The last one, remember that that's the F giving the G graph a hug. So the G graph goes inside. So this is going to be F of G of 1. So I have to start from the inside. I have to go find G of 1. So on the G graph, I have to go over to 1, and at 1, it goes up to 5. So this turns into F of 5. Now, on the F graph, I'm going to go over to 5, and my graph is up at 4. First step is always to rewrite. So make sure you rewrite each one of these operations. That's how I can at least give you some partial credit. So this section, I get a lot of people that get no points because they get all the wrong answers and they didn't even write anything down. I can't give you partial credit if you don't write something down. Last, write an equation for the cubic function. This is multiple choice, so you'll have a little bit of a crutch there. This is a cubic, so we know it's going to be an x cubed graph. I need to find my center or starting point. So it's at 2, 1. Also, is this graph positive or negative? From left to right, my graph is pointing down, so this is a negative graph. So I'm going to write myself a template. So f of x is equal to, leave myself a space, x cubed. So I left myself this is a template. I left myself a space for a, or a reflection. Like this is my a, my h, and my k. So remember that it's always opposite h. So instead of positive 2, I'm going to plug in negative 2. And then plus 1. And I have to have a negative out in front because it's a negative graph.
Wait a minute.
Uh-huh.
How'd you get the x?
This is a cubic graph. The other graph that we learned how to graph was a square root function, and those kind of look like the symbol of a square root. They have this shape. Let me ask you guys a question. If I gave you a graph and I said, what is the solution? What do you look for? X-intercepts. X is equal to whatever or wherever it crosses the x-axis, right? All right, first 2 rows, let's get up and put your phones on the wall. Turn in your warm-up paper.